I wanted to create a forum where people can see that there are these very varied experiences that people can have with casual hookups, from the most amazing sex ever to the worst sex ever to many blah kind of meh experiences that also make up casual sex.
Hello and welcome, fellow human. My name is Zachary Stockill, and you are listening to Humans in Love, a podcast that looks at culture, relationships, and personal development from unconventional perspectives. Join me as I dig into the question of how people like you and I might get more out of life and love. Thanks for being here. One of the things about living in a so-called developing country is that that country is actively developing. You might hear construction noise outside of my window as I record this. I try to avoid that if I can, but it seems to be inescapable today, and I want to get this out on time, so I will keep this intro very brief. But suffice it to say, I'm really excited to share today's episode. Dr. Zhana Vrangalova is a New York City-based sex researcher who studies casual sex, non-monogamy, and sexual orientation. She has a PhD in developmental psychology from Cornell and currently teaches human sexuality-related courses as an adjunct professor at New York University. In addition, Dr. Zhana is the founder of the Casual Sex Project, a forum where people can share their experiences with casual sex, and she's also the co-host of the tremendous Science of Sex podcast. Her work has been featured in Playboy, The New Yorker, Vice, and about 100 other publications. She's all over the web if you Google her name. Dr. Zhana believes that nothing is one size fits all when it comes to sex, and I agree with her. That's why I wanted to talk to her today. In today's episode of Humans in Love, we talk about how casual sex is impacting all of us, who benefits from casual sex and who might not, the complicated cultural politics of Me Too and consent, Dr. Zhana's fascinating background growing up in Macedonia, and a whole lot more. I had a lot of fun talking to Dr. Zhana today, and I think you're also really going to enjoy today's interview. Before we get into it, I'll remind you that ratings and reviews are absolutely crucial to any podcast success, including this one. So if you're digging the show, please give Humans in Love a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. It would mean a lot to me, and send me an email if you do. I will respond with happy emoticons, or I'll do something nice. Ratings and reviews they mean a lot, and when I stumble upon them, they always put a big smile on my face. So yes, please leave a rating and review. Without any further ado, let's get right into it. I hope you enjoy my chat with Dr. Zhana. So Dr. Zhana, welcome to Humans in Love.
Thank you for having me.
And first off, I am pronouncing that correct, right? Zhana.
You are, yes. A lot of people get it wrong, but you got it right.
Excellent. Yes, I like people whose name starts with Z. That's always a good thing for me. The first question.
Z and Z today.
Absolutely. No, Z and Z. I'm Canadian, so.
Oh, sorry. Well.
That's quite all right. No problem. The first question I have for you, it might sound a bit basic, but I think it would be worthwhile. I was thinking about the term casual sex, which a lot of your research revolves around. And I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm not crazy about that term, because it kind of implies, to my mind at least, it implies that casual sex is always very casual, when I think that you can have casual sex that can be quite meaningful. But anyway, when we talk about casual sex, what do we mean, or what particularly do you mean by that term when you use that term?
I agree that it's not the perfect word for that describes all of the interactions that would fall into that. And in fact, some people do think of very, very, very casual types of interactions when they think about casual sex. I use the term, as imperfect as it is, to describe an umbrella, as an umbrella term to describe a broader range of interactions, all of which are put together by the fact that the people who are having sex with each other at the time are not in a long-term committed relationship. And so defined this broadly, you can think of it as a very wide range of things that can go from, the one night stand with someone that you just met, right? A random stranger on the street that you ended up hooking up in a dark alley, whose name you might not even know, right? All the way to, say, something like friends with benefits that you have been meeting and for years potentially, where you have both the sexual component but also a non-sexual friendship that exists between the two people. The only thing missing there would be that kind of romantic commitment to being a couple and being building a life together. And for many people, that also means a lack of exclusivity, sexual romantic exclusivity, and so on. And there's certainly, once you get to that point of these friends with benefits, you get into that gray area of, well, how casual is this really? And I agree that a lot of these interactions may not be very casual, in the sense that you might have a certain amount of emotional connection to that person. You might feel a fair amount of passion and intimacy with that person. You may feel some level of commitment to continuing a friendship with that person, or a continued casual, non-romantic kind of a relationship. So there's a lot that can go in there, and the different types of casual sex and the different levels of these components of intimacy, passion, emotional connection, and commitment. All of those, you can think of them as existing on a continuum, and depending on how much of each of these components is present in any one of these relationships, they can feel very different. They can have different consequences. They can be differently satisfying to different people, and so on.
Right. I really...
Sorry, that was a very long answer.
No, not at all. No, not at all. This is a long form podcast, and we like long answers. I have about 1 million questions for you, and I want to dig into your research as we go. But before we do, I think I mentioned to you, I heard you on Chris Ryan's podcast, and you talked a little bit about this, but I'd like to know more. Where did your interest in studying sex, and in particular casual sex, come from?
I've always been interested in sexuality, and it's partly because I was always sexually precocious and outside the norm in many ways in my desires and behaviors as I was growing up. And I was growing up in Macedonia, which is a small country in the Eastern European kind of part of the world. And it was always, sexuality always seemed to be something that everybody wanted and desired and obviously engaged in to some extent, yet there was so much taboo around it, so much suppression, and so that ambivalence that we all feel about sexuality was absolutely fascinating to me. So I wanted to spend my life kind of studying that and engaging with that intellectually, in trying to understand how people navigate this world of sex, especially when their desires and interests, sexual interests and desires, fall outside the norm of what is considered acceptable in their societies. And casual sex is one of the things that I study, as well as consensual non-monogamy, open relationships, and also non-heterosexuality, which in some ways were all parts of sexual interests and desires that I had and had experiences with. And also I experienced a lot of people around me struggling in some way, shape, or form with those kinds of desires and how to incorporate them in a healthy way in their lives. So that's how that happened.
Could you paint the picture a little more? I mean, I'm really curious about what it would be like to grow up in that society back in what I would imagine the 90s or something. I mean, was there, did you feel shame around either your sexuality or even just the topic in general growing up?
So it was an interesting contrast in some ways to what most people in the US and maybe Canada to some extent would be familiar with, because it was, a lot of the shame around sexuality that people feel in these parts of the world in Northern America comes from religion, right? Well, Macedonia was an atheist country, or Yugoslavia. The entire Macedonia used to be part of this larger country of Yugoslavia. It was one of the republics in Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia, as many of the other socialist countries, was fully atheist. And so there was no religion at all to have that shame around any sexuality. But there was still, it was a relatively patriarchal culture with double sexual standards, where women obviously were not expected to have nearly as much sexual experience or interest as men were, where homosexuality or any kind of deviation from complete heterosexuality was not accepted and was very much looked down upon. It was still at the time illegal, where there was certainly no discussion of anything other than fully monogamous heterosexual relationships. And so it was less shame, and it was more just complete ignorance and I don't know, feeling like if you have these interests or desires, you're just weird. You're weird. Like nobody has them. What do you mean you have them? And I don't know. So maybe that's how I experienced it. Maybe other people would have felt a lot more shame. I also tend to be a very thick-skinned person for some reason. I think probably biologically I ended up being that way. So I don't feel it very, very kind of, it doesn't affect me as much as it might affect other people. I certainly felt that, people would judge. But I felt it was more of that, like, oh, you're just so weird. Or if you had those things or desires, you'd be weird.
Did you find like-minded people in Macedonia when you were growing up? Like, did you manage to connect with some people who were on a similar wavelength?
Yeah, I did, especially with, there was a fledgling gay community when I was, I guess, just coming out of high school and starting college, and I went to college there. So that was the time that Macedonia had already become an independent country, and the first initial kind of civil society mechanisms were being put in place. And so some of the first non-governmental, non-for-profit organizations that were formed to work, for LGBT rights started to exist. And I kind of got involved with some of them. I did some research for them, and that's what my undergraduate thesis was about, was kind of gay, lesbian identity development. And so at least on that level, I did get to meet some people who were somewhat more sexually experimental and open and accepting. So yeah.
What's the situation like now in Macedonia? Like when you go home, is the country basically unrecognizable to the one you grew up in, or what's the scene there like now?
Oh God, I don't go back very often, so I don't know. I've been living in the U.S. for 12, 13 years almost, and so I've really not. I just don't know. I mean, things have changed. Obviously, gay rights have become a lot more visible. And we also did have 10 years of a pretty conservative right-wing government that came on in power when I left, the year I left or something like that. And so there was a bit of a stagnation in that process. But now there is a more liberal, I guess, more progressive government that just came to power a couple of years ago. So I think things are moving. I mean, in some other ways, like sexual and reproductive health, that was always abortion was always legal in Macedonia. And then the new government, the more right-wing government, made it illegal all of a sudden, or made it very, very, very difficult to obtain, lots of hoops to jump through in order to get it. And so some things really went backwards in some way. And then religion was introduced. That's another thing that happened, that when socialism failed, people all of a sudden started becoming religious or refound religion. And so there was a lot of that came onto the scene as well in those intervening 10 or so years. So yeah, there have been a lot of changes.
Yeah, you'll have to forgive me. I'm in this period now where I'm kind of obsessed with the post-Soviet Union sphere and all the things that happened there in the 90s, and it's really interesting stuff. But yeah, perhaps that's another podcast.
Yeah. Right.
So would you say most of your research then centers around casual sex? Is that fair to say?
casual sex and non-heterosexuality.
And I'm really curious about when you started actually digging into the academic literature surrounding this topic. Has there been a lot of research done in any field on casual sex when you started?
When I first started out, when I got to Cornell and became a grad student there and started looking at the literature in casual sex, there was some, not a lot but somehow over those next 5 years or so, there was more and more and more, and now there's a plethora of research from psychologists, from sociologists, from clinical people. There's been a lot more interest in that, and so that literature has just ballooned over the last 12 years or so. But yeah, at that time there wasn't a lot, and what did exist, and I was particularly interested because there's obviously a lot of different ways that you can approach that question. So there were some studies looking into why people might be having these desires, why people might be interested in casual sex as opposed to long-term romantic relationships. And then there was the other side of the equation, which was, is this something that is harming people? Right? Is this harmful to their mental and physical health? So I was more my own research was more on the other side of the mental and social, physical well-being side of things. So there were, and in both aspects, there has been quite a bit of research done lately.
And if you had to say lately or over the past decade or so, what are the main questions driving your research? Like, what are you really trying to understand better?
Well, my own research was always driven by, is this harmful to people? Is this behavior harmful to people? And who is it harmful for, or how is it harmful for? So as far as that camp's concerned, on the harmfulness of casual sex, when I started doing the research, it was very, very black or white. It was very simplistic in the way the research was being done. People would get split into, the participants would get split into the people who've had casual sex and the people who haven't had casual sex, and then you would measure, let's say, depression or self-esteem or something like that, and then you would just compare whether one is higher than the other. And to me, that was way too simplistic because, as we talked about, the casual sex is very, very wide, and there's so many different kinds of experiences that can go into that. There's so many different kinds of people that can end up engaging in these kinds of experiences. And so, to me, asking this very general, simplistic question of, is casual sex bad for you, was pointless, because I was absolutely convinced that some types of casual sex, for some people, were harmful. And then other types of casual sex experiences, and for other types of people, were not harmful. In fact, may be beneficial. And so I wanted to introduce that more complex kind of analysis into the equation, where we looked at, maybe how you go about casual sex, or what kinds of casual sex experiences you're having, or what kind of person you are, and that for some of these, you might have different kinds of mental and physical health outcomes than for other.
Yeah, and I think that's the main reason I appreciate what you're doing, because I see a lot of binary thinking in discussions like this, and a lot of people who are partisans on one side or the other, and without realizing the complexity of the human condition and diversity of human beings. I kind of compare it to diets, actually. Like, for example, I tend to function because of my genetic whatever profile. I tend to function really well on a low carb diet. Other people may not, but I don't think that everyone should necessarily do what I'm doing, and I kind of feel like people who are either, staunch advocates for monogamy are trying to tell everyone that monogamy is best for everyone. And on the other side, people saying the same thing. It just seems to me absurd. And that's probably the main reason I wanted to talk to you today, because I think this is important, Yeah.
I agree. I mean, especially when it comes to sex, and diet is another good example. Nothing sexual is for everybody. We're different people, have different needs, can have different abilities to deal with the different things, and you're gonna, casual sex can have benefits, it also has its risks. And depending on your personality, your interests, your environment, your past experiences, how thick your skin is, how good you are at getting the pleasure that you want out of these casual situations, and how much you're driven by novelty. Some of us are very driven by novelty, and if you're one of those people, you're going to get a lot more pleasure out of these novel situations, out of these novel people, even if the sex is not that good necessarily. Whereas if you're someone who doesn't get a lot of benefit, a lot of reward, like physiological brain reward for novelty, then it might be more trouble than it's worth. And there's so many of these kinds of issues that will make you more or less susceptible to enjoy the benefits versus be harmed by the potential risks of casual sex. Because everything we do has risks to some extent. Rock climbing has risks, yet a lot of people do them. A lot of people go rock climbing and deal with the risks. And for other people, it's like, no, it's just not worth it. It's not exciting enough for me, or it's too exciting, too scary for me to even contemplate it. And so I think of casual sex just like that. It's a somewhat higher risk activity. Like chances of getting hurt while rock climbing are zero if you never go climbing.
Right.
Chances are higher if you go climbing at your local climbing gym. And then chances are much higher than that if you go climbing in the wild, right, in the mountains, and you go on alpine kind of mountaineering trips. And so it's kind of the same. Sex has no risks whatsoever if you never do it. It has somewhat higher risks if you do it with a single long-term partner. It has more risks if you do it with casual partners that you know less or not at all. And the more you do it, the more you do these higher risk activities, the higher risk, the higher those risks are. But for some people, those higher risks carry higher rewards. And so it's all about who you are, what your needs are, and how good you are about mitigating the potential risks in the behaviors that you're engaging in.
Let's talk about some of these risks. I mean, the obvious one that comes to my mind, and I'm sure most people listening, is STDs. But aside from that,
Sure.
I mean, what are the risks of casual sex as you see them? Like, what are the first things that come to mind?
Well, so yeah, obviously the STI risk and unwanted pregnancies is the first one. Other risks.
I forgot all about pregnancy. My God, yeah. That's kind of a big one.
There's that too.
Wow.
I mean, depending on the kind of sex you're having and the kinds of genders that you're having sex with, but yes, that can often factor in. Yeah. Then you have things like, you already mentioned, the slut shaming that can come with it, the social ostracism, excuse me, that can come with it. One of the things that a lot of people complain about or worry about is lack of pleasure. That when you're engaging with people who you don't know very well, they don't know you very well, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to find, what it is that you might like and the other person might like, that they're just not physically, sexually, they're not pleasurable. Then you have people being disrespectful to one another, either during or after the experience, because very often the way we conceptualize casual sex is that the people you're having casual sex with, they're not as worthy of respect as, say, someone that you might be interested in a romantic relationship with. And so that can bleed into how you treat those people as not as well as you might treat other people. Then you have issues around catching feelings when you don't want to be catching feelings for a particular person. I mean, catching feelings can obviously be amazing when it's reciprocated and you want that to be happening, but then sometimes it can happen even when you don't want it. What are some other risks? I think those are the main ones. I'm sure I can think of more.
Yeah. No, I think that probably covers most of them. And speaking as personally or not as you like, you can speak more broadly. Like, what are some of the benefits as you see them?
So the benefits are things like fun, right? Fun.
It's important.
It's important. If this is something that is fun to you, as we said already, it might not at all feel fun to you, but there are people for whom it's exciting. The whole adventurous piece of it, that you don't know who you're going to get with, so the sex might be amazing. I mean, chances are it could be terrible as well, but it could be amazing, And so that aspect of it, a lot of the time casual sex happens in these kind of unexpected ways, under unexpected circumstances. And so it makes for good stories. It makes for really kind of exciting, unexpected experiences that some of us who are high on that trait of sensation seeking and novelty seeking value quite a bit and get a lot of reward out of. Then you could get pretty good sex. You could get experiences that you might not be able to get otherwise. When you have sex with one person over a very long period of time, the sex might be good, but it might also be limited in the types of activities that you might be engaging in because of that person's specific set of interests, desires, abilities, body parts, and all that. And so you can get a lot more diversity in your sexual experiences in terms of skills and activities that you get to engage in. For some people, it can also be easier to try something that's more risque in a casual context because the stakes are lower. If that person says, if you're like, I want you to pee on me, and that person's like, ooh, gross, it's no big deal. You might never see that person again. Whereas if you say that to your long-term boyfriend, girlfriend, and they say, ew, gross, and that carries a lot higher stakes. They might end up breaking up with you because of that. And your whole life might change because you expressed this one non-traditional desire. I think other benefits are things like increasing social networks and kind of making friends, getting to know people and connecting with people on different levels, and strengthening some of those friendships, especially for people who go about their casual sex experiences in a more friendly, respectful way. Don't necessarily look at, I think people can often look at their casual sex exploits as experiences as more of like hunting exploits, not just on the bedpost kind of thing, or they can look at just making friends that has a sexual component to that friendship. And so there's that. What else? I'm sure there are more, but those are, I think, the main ones.
No, I think that covers a lot of territory. So I'm just picturing, say, someone listening to this. Let's say a young person, doesn't matter, male or female, and they came to your office and they said, "Listen, like I've never had a lot of casual encounters, and this seems like it might be appealing to me." What are some of the questions you might ask them? Like, is there a certain type of person who is best suited to more casual sexual relationships, or does it really come down to like what phase you're at in life?
It's a mix. It's absolutely a mix of both these more stable, I guess, if you want to look at it, stable personality traits, which may have a significant biological component, and then also where you're at in life in terms of stages, where you are growing up and what your community is. So I would ask a series of questions, and I do this. In fact, if people would like to figure out where they stand on their casual sex, I don't know, susceptibility or to enjoy versus get harmed by it, I do these private kind of educational sessions and coaching sessions. And there's a set of questions that I would go through. The first would be, is this something that sounds exciting to you, right? Is having sex with someone that you might never see again, who you don't know very well or at all, and who might not, you might never see again after that. Is that exciting? I think that's the key, right? Then I would ask about how good they are about getting pleasure in different sexual contexts. Because as I said, when you're having sex, I mean, the primary thing that you're getting out of these experiences is sexual satisfaction, or one of the primary goals for having casual sex is getting sexual satisfaction. And so, but not all bodies and not all minds can get aroused easily and quickly and without a lot of distractions. And some people are not very assertive in asking for the kinds of things that they want. And I think in order to find these experiences pleasurable, and I think this might be even more particularly important for women, they have to be to some extent in tune with their bodies, know what their bodies need, and then assertive enough to get that. Because, as we said, these are often partners that you don't know very well. They don't know you. They might not care much about you and your pleasure. It might be awkward. People are very awkward about talking about sex and asking about the things that they want or not want. And so you kind of have to have a certain level of assertiveness in order to get what you want. Let's move this way. Put your hand here, or let's move over there, or go slower, go faster.
And
all of those things you
men like
have
that.
to get them.
Like men appreciate that a lot. I think that's often lost in conversations like this.
Yeah, I often hear from women when I tell them this, and they're like, "Yeah, but the guy's going to feel like his ego is hurt because he's supposed to know. He's the man. He's supposed to know. And if I tell him what I want, then he's going to feel like he didn't figure it out on his own." And what I hear from men, and I think to some extent that might be true. There might be some men out there. I mean, I'm sure there are, who want to think like, I'm the man, I know it all, and every woman I ever touch is just going to start having massive orgasms out of nowhere, right?
Well, I don't like to brag, but
right. I'm sure that's true. Yes. But from what I hear from men is quite the opposite, or the majority of men is quite the opposite. When they do end up with a sexual partner who's assertive and tells them what she wants, they're ecstatic. They're like, "Oh my God, thank you! Finally,
Absolutely.
I don't have to feel like I'm in a dark cave and I'm kind of feeling my way around it with no feedback whatsoever. I want feedback. It's great to be with someone who knows her body, knows how to come, how to make herself come, or how to get me to help her to have an orgasm and have pleasure and so on." So I think that is really important. Is this something that you are, your body, and also some bodies just take longer to get going. And if you only have a 10-minute thing in a bathroom at the club, it might not be as satisfying for you if you're someone who needs 30 minutes of foreplay, And so there are both these kind of physiological differences between us, and then also these assertiveness kind of psychological differences between us that I would ask people to really think about. I would then also ask about emotions and how easily they get attached to people. That might not be the best idea to get attached to. Some of us, again, for different reasons, some of it biological, we tend to get infatuated with partners, especially if the sex was good and kind of intimate and all that, and so whereas other people take a lot longer for that infatuation to kick in. And so that might not be a deal breaker for having casual sex, but if you're someone who gets infatuated quite easily, then you might have to put in some additional kinds of stopping mechanisms, or how to prevent that from happening. How often you see the person, or how much how intimate you allow that experience to be, and how much time you spend with them, and so on. Then I would probably ask about their social environment and whether they'll be how ostracized or judged or bullied they might end up being by other people in their environment if they engage in this, and especially if they engage in this on a somewhat regular basis, and then how thick their skin is. The same kind of person, one person might experience a certain level of bullying or social slut shaming and social ostracism for this behavior and be able to completely brush it off. And another person, that same amount of bullying might get them to commit suicide. So how thick your skin is also quite important in this. Yeah, there are a couple of other things, I guess, but these are the main things that I would ask.
Well, no, that's great. I think that's a really that's a pretty exhaustive answer. And again, I appreciate you doing this, because maybe your perception is different. I haven't been full-time based in the West for a little while, but it seems to me in many ways, I'm 30. So I guess that
Mm-hmm.
qualifies me as a millennial, unfortunately.
Yep.
Um,
Why? What's wrong with being a
well,
millennial?
well, I mean, that's a good question. I don't, I'm not crazy about I think like Gen X is cooler, you know, like the 60s hippies generation. I feel like they had a lot more cool stuff associated with it, you know, like we're associated with being glued to our phones and, you know, this
Right,
obsession
right.
with social validation and stuff. Anyway, that's another podcast. But I think what you're doing is so important because I see a society that venerates all kinds of casual sex without having these nuanced discussions like you and I are having, saying that
Mm,
it can absolutely be great for some of us, and for others, it's probably not a good idea, you know,
mm-hmm.
or at least not in this particular, you know, moment in your life. And I just
Mm-hmm.
want to emphasize, I think it's important work that you're doing. As long as we're talking about millennials, I don't know if you can speak to this at all, but I've been seeing headlines, and you know, some of it's probably just clickbait, but studies coming out saying that our parents or my parents or whatever actually
Mm-hmm.
had more sex than like millennials. Can you speak to
Mm-hmm.
that at all? I mean, you work at a university. What do you have any idea about that?
Yeah, so this has been a big paradox, and it's not just clickbait. There are good studies, well done, with large nationally representative samples of the, say, the US population or the UK population, finding this. Now there have been several. It's not just one researcher or one lab. Now we have several labs that are finding the same thing with different data sets. And so I
That's
think
fascinating.
it's not a fluke. Yeah. So I think it's not a fluke. It's not, this one particular study got it wrong or something. I think it's a real trend, and the trend is that millennials are having sex with fewer partners. They're having sex less often. They're more likely to still be virgins at their kind of late teens, early 20s than their parents' generation, and it kind of all of that seems to be pretty consistent findings across several different studies. I actually have on my podcast, we do an entire hour with one of the researchers who's published several of these studies, and kind of trying to delve into, okay, what the heck is going on, right? And we don't actually have a very good answer yet as to why we're finding this and what exactly is going on. And pretty much everybody I've talked to in the academic world thinks that there are a couple of different things potentially contributing to this. One is that there is more, there's more acceptance for sexual diversity of all kinds, including people who are not particularly sexual. So for asexuality or demisexuality and so on, people who really have no interest or desire to have sex with people until they are very deeply committed and emotionally involved with. That's the general definition of demisexuality. And so that a lot of those people who may have in past generations be kind of not forced necessarily, but kind of self-coerced into having sexual and romantic relationships are now saying, no, I think I'm asexual and I don't really want to have sex, or feeling more empowered to say no. So I think part of the reason maybe is probably that. Then another potential explanation for that is that today's generation is just too busy with a lot of other things, that educational requirements are getting more and more in order to succeed in life. And there are so many more distractions, like our phones, as you mentioned, and social media, and amazing shows on Netflix and on Hulu and
That's
whatnot.
depressing.
That also the availability of porn, online porn, may be playing a role in satisfying many people's sexual needs to some extent in a way that's easy, quick, that doesn't require you to go out, spend money, be potentially rejected, social awkward moments, have socially awkward moments and all that. And that if you satisfy your need in that way, then you don't need to satisfy your need with a real life partner and expose yourself to all the other potential risks that go with it. And then also that some of the some of the hookup, the Tinders and Bumbles and all that of the world. I guess I don't know. Does Bumble qualify as a hookup?
What's
I don't know.
Bumble?
Anyway, oh, it's just another
Okay.
dating app.
I'm out of the loop. I'm not a millennial, I don't think.
Well, you're a millennial in northern Thailand,
Exactly.
so
Yeah.
I don't know. Things are different there. So there is some research coming out. Oh, and I actually forgot to mention this benefit of casual sex when we were talking about the benefits. But a lot of people mention feeling desirable and feeling validated as one of the things that comes with casual sex as well. That a lot of people might be finding you get this validation from the partners who are having these casual interactions with you, that they find you attractive and desirable and interesting and all of those things, and that is good for the self-esteem. Everybody likes to know that other people like them and find them attractive, and so the Tinders of the current world are also playing that role. So there is some research coming out now finding that there are a lot of people whose primary reason for being on apps like Tinder is to get that validation, to get that match, that the person that they swiped right on, that they said yes to, I like you, also found them attractive. And that just gives you this jolt of reward, of self-esteem, validation, and satisfaction. And they don't necessarily need to or are interested in meeting with that person in real life. So, or maybe they'll chat a little bit with that person, and that chatting is providing some of that need satisfaction for human connection, for validation, for a little bit of flirtation, without having to, again, go out, spend money, spend time, spend social capital, and potentially expose yourself to risks like STIs, bad sex, sexual assault, and so on.
Unwanted pregnancies.
Unwanted pregnancies.
Yeah, that minor issue. Yeah.
Right.
I wonder, I have no idea, but I wonder if it is in some way related to testosterone levels dropping, because I've also read some studies that seem to indicate that among both men and women, testosterone is going down across the decades, which plays a critical role in obviously men's sex drive, but also women's sex drive. I wonder if it has something to do with that. Do you remember the name of the researcher? I'm going to look that episode up.
That's one of the first few, I want to say the first 5 episodes of the Science of Sex podcast. And the researcher's name is Brooke Wells, Wells. I forget what the name of the episode was, but it's definitely sometime in the first 5 or so.
Well, let's take a minute to plug your podcast. Who would benefit from listening to your podcast? What's the podcast about?
So the podcast is called the Science of Sex Podcast, and people can find it wherever they find their podcasts. And it's we talk about, so it's a podcast that I do together with a radio personality, Joe, who doesn't, he's not an academic in this area, not a clinician. He's just a guy who is interested in sex, and we are kind of this, the academic and the clueless dude who just wants to learn about sex, and who also has a more traditional lifestyle in terms of like a long-term monogamous relationship, as opposed to Dr. Zhana's crazy adventures. But we don't talk about our personal stuff as much. It is really about the science of sex. So our main thing is interviewing researchers who do the research, who publish the science, and each time we talk about either a particular study that they've published recently, or a broader topic that they've researched more heavily, and that's kind of what we talk about. So it's for people who want to engage a little bit more with the science. It's not there are many podcasts out there about sex that are more poppy, that are more kind of conversational around some of these issues, more practical. This is more about delving into the science and understanding some of the nuances of what the different issues are. But I think a lot of people who are interested in that will find it interesting. And it's a long form podcast as well. It's about an hour long, and we do some other before our guests come on, we discuss some other kind of current relevant issues around the world of sex that are happening in the world.
Another project of yours I find really interesting is the Casual Sex Project. Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes, the Casual Sex Project, which is basically a website where people can post their true stories of hookups. And at this point, my God, I don't even know. We probably have about 4,000 stories, if not more, from people from all over the world who have submitted their stories, their hookup experiences. And it's basically a repository of different hookup experiences. And I started that about 4 years ago when I came out of academia. I finished my PhD, which my thesis was on casual sex. And so that was a lot on my mind, was thinking about some of the ways that we talk about casual sex in our world, both in academia and outside of academia, and how little nuance there is about this topic, that it was always very black or white. It's either it's the worst thing ever, or, oh my God, it's the best thing ever. Everybody should be doing it. And also there was almost no voices out there sharing or talking about casual sex that were not college students. A lot of the research that we had was on college students. A lot of the kind of the popular media writings about casual sex was about college hookups, it was all college hookups. And so I was thinking, look, people who are not in college are also hooking up. And, and not just in the US, people from all over the world who are not in college are hooking up at all ages. And also I know there is this complexity and variety of experiences with casual sex that people have. And so I wanted to create a forum where people can show that, people can go and see that there are these very varied experiences that people can have with casual hookups, from the most amazing sex ever to the worst sex ever, to many blah kind of meh experiences that also make casual sex or make part of what casual sex can be. And that's what it is. It's, people can go and post their own stories. People can perv on other people's stories. I think some people are using it as masturbation fodder, but a lot of the time they're using it to just kind of see the diversity of what sexual experiences can be and feel like they're not alone, that other people have those kinds of desires or interests and experiences.
How has your research, but also perhaps these other projects, but I guess I'm most interested in your actual academic research, how has it impacted your personal life, or has it impacted your personal life?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a bidirectional kind of influence going on whereby my own personal life informs my research, and then my research informs my personal life. I think in some ways I've become a lot more deliberate and aware of the kinds of things that I do, and how I act and what drives my behavior. I often will think about the implications of some of the research on, am I doing this for the right reasons? Am I, am I going about this particular, say, casual encounter or relationship in the best way possible, what I know is the best way possible from the research that I've done. So yeah, I think it's definitely made things probably better and more deliberate, and has allowed me to kind of hone in my skill set, both not so much the physical stuff, but the psychological approach that I take to these different experiences.
What would you say is the main question that's driving you lately? Like, is there something you're really trying to figure out, or some impact you're really trying to have? Like, what's driving you lately?
I have been, I was actually writing a book about casual sex, about all of the stuff that we're talking about, and I kind of put it on hold. It was not getting the kind of traction with the publishing houses that I wanted it to have. And lately, I've started to think a lot more about the Me Too movement and consent. And so I've done a couple of talks. I've written a couple of articles about that, and so I've been kind of engaged more in figuring out how to crack this new world of consent without taking things to an extreme, which I think a lot of people have taken things to, that is just unrealistic and unattainable and frankly not desirable for a lot of people. I think that the pendulum has swung a little too far from the, everything is okay pretty much unless the person is kicking and screaming and calling the cops on you, to nothing is okay unless there's a written video agreement about every single sexual act that you are going to engage in, and that is being verbally confirmed every 15 seconds kind of thing. And and everybody has to be completely sober, and there can be no power differential between you and all of these things. And it has to happen in the designated flirting or sex zones like clubs and or dating apps, and you cannot hit on anybody outside of those kinds of areas. And so I think it's normal that is happening as a reaction to the old model, which clearly wasn't working for a lot of people and resulted in a lot of unwanted experiences and pure sexual assault kinds of experiences. And so I think it's an overcorrection to doing things the way we were doing things for a very long time. But that other end of the spectrum isn't desirable and or realistic either. And so I've been kind of thinking about, okay, how do we deal with some of those gray areas in ways that are realistic and are desirable for people?
That sounds like it would be an extremely difficult project, but extremely valuable. I really hope you pursue that, because my God, is something like that needed right now? Yeah. We could talk for an hour about Me Too and just because I see a generation of young men growing up being terrified talking to women, and a generation of young women growing up being really confused about just how to approach this stuff. I mean, that sounds, I don't want to do it, but Godspeed, because I feel like that'd be a bit of a landmine, but that sounds really intriguing.
Yeah, it is a huge landmine. So, maybe in a year or so, I can come back on the podcast and talk about that and how I've managed to tackle that issue.
That would be great. Yes, you have an open invitation. So for the last couple of minutes, I'd like to try something I've never done before. So you are officially my guinea pig.
Ooh.
This is
great.
Yeah, this is totally.
I love popping cherries.
Great. That's great. Yeah. So I want you to finish these sentences with the first things that come to mind, and using as few words as possible. This could be totally corny, but I want to try it. Okay.
Okay. First thing that comes to mind, as few words as possible.
Yes. The trait that I find the most attractive in intimate partners is
abs. How's that? Few words.
That's wonderful. I love how glib that answer was. That makes me happy.
I have my shallow moments.
That's great. No, that really made me happy.
I own them.
Okay, let's try another one. Above all, I would like to be remembered as.
Ooh, that's a hard one. Sexual pioneer.
That's great. Yeah, I like that.
Sexual revolutionary sounds better, but okay, pioneer would work too. Okay.
For my last one.
Okay, go ahead.
Love is.
Wonderful.
You sound so tentative. Wonderful is great. Okay. Well, thank you for playing ball. That was fun.
I mean, yeah, there's so much to say about all of those things, obviously, but
well, do you know
some first
the
first
Proust
things that come to mind.
the Proust questionnaire, that feature in Vanity Fair where it's like similar. It's this interview format I like where it's similar. But thank you for playing ball. I appreciate that. Dr. Zhana, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Zach.
There you have it, my friends. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Dr. Zhana. I had fun, in case you can't tell. And a reminder that if you enjoyed today's chat and you'd like to learn more about Dr. Zhana, you can go to humansandlove.com, where you can find show notes and links to everything we talked about today, links to Dr. Zhana's Casual Sex Project, links to the Science of Sex podcast, links to all the good things we talked about in today's episode. Before I let you go, I'll ask you once more to please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast app of choice. I say it every show. It might get annoying, but I mean it when I say that those ratings and reviews are really important for getting word out about the show. Before I let you go, I'll remind you that life is short, far too short, in fact, for bad sex. Talk to you very soon, my friends. I'll talk to you next Tuesday, in fact.